that's what performance should be. It should just be being, And what would your character do when they're doing nothing, I found myself so uncomfortable for a while because I wasn't performing, I wasn't responding, I wasn't doing anything. And actually, that inner life, that being, is something that we should all have in all of the characters that we make.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Ṣọpẹ Dìrísù is an actor. He sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work. I heard you talk about how physicality is important to you as an actor. You were mentioning how you would like the physicality of your character to almost precede even what you say, like almost like do some of the work before you even start talking. And I found that so fascinating. But does that mean that you actually start your process with trying to embody the character in a physical way?
I don't know if that's the beginning of my process, but it's definitely a part of it. It's definitely important to me. I think the beginning of my process is the script. I mean, the script for me is the Bible, basically. Everything that we know to be true about your character comes from the text. And the text changes. And the text changes more in like film and television than it does in theater. With theater, like it's pretty solid. And it comes from I like to make lists in terms of what the character says about himself, what other people say about the character, and there's a third one, what the character says about other people. And I think the last two help you with your relationships. And the first one is going to be probably one of the most honest assessments. But then everything is qualified, right? Like, why is your character saying that about themselves? Is it because they're downplaying themselves and to be deferential to somebody else or to avoid? Is it because they want to be seen as something that they're not, And all of those little nuances, the qualities of the information that you're getting is super important because it helps you build up this bigger picture of what we know to be true. And then everything else you do on top of that is a choice. But for example, if we're looking at Gangs of London, there's a line in the text that speaks to something that I already knew. And that's in the first episode, Jim says to Elliot, it takes more than that to I can't remember the exact line, but he calls him a washed up squaddy, right? And that's in reference to his time in the army. So I know that Elliot was a soldier, which means that if he'd been in the army for a long time, there'd be a heaviness that comes from all the equipment that you have as a soldier, like a foundation, like a groundedness to his movement. And there would be like tendencies that you'd have. You'd always have your head on a swivel because you know to expect danger from different places, especially when you're on patrol. And then as a policeman, the same. You're walking the beat, but you've got your eyes looking to see things that don't fit, So I think that with Elliot, there was this like weight that he had that comes from all the equipment. In carrying the gun, there's like a side that he favors. I'm right-handed, so it makes sense for him to be right-handed, which means that his left shoulder might lead in terms of aiming, and when you're holding a rifle, your left shoulder leads, Just nuances like that, I think, what can be imperceptible on screen, actually. But if I know that I'm doing it, it means that my performance is as truthful as possible, regardless of whether or not anybody else knows. And yeah, if I'm the source of the storytelling, even if the story changes as it gets received by lots of different people, I know the source is as true and honest as it can be.
So what I'm hearing is that all of that came from almost like a clue in the script, this one line, and then you're building on that, and you're building on that confidently because it is a line in the script, so there is a truth in it. There is a reality to it. What if you're not getting a lot of that in a script, but you want to build that same kind of depth of the character? Like, do you freely and confidently make choices like that, even if there aren't clues in the script?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think that's what people talk about, making choices. And choices can be big in terms of like how you're going to deliver this line, but also if everything you're doing is truthful, then the reason that you deliver this line like that, one of my drama teachers when I was younger said that you have to be prepared to the point where the line that your character said is the only thing they could have said in that moment because of everything that's come before and what's happening to this character that has a whole life and backstory in this moment, what's affecting him or her right now. This is the only thing that they could have said, you know? That changes from actor to actor because we all have our own different backstories as human beings. And what we bring to a character is going to be different. So yeah, I mean, you can have a literal skeleton of a character. Adam is 27. That's it. So I'm going to be like, okay, cool. So where did Adam go to school? And like, what does Adam do when he's not in this scene? And all of those decisions are going to create an Adam. And all of those decisions might be wrong. And I have to change them because it doesn't work with what we're trying to create. But I think it is also super useful to work with a director in terms of they've got an overview of their whole project, what they're trying to achieve. And I think it's also really important to remember that unless it's a one-man show, you're also a color in this painting. You're not the whole thing. So how does it fit in and what we're trying to achieve and what's the dynamic between these two characters? Lots of conversations that can be had. But I think the more detailed you are in your work, the more real your characters become.
You did a couple kind of difficult Shakespeare productions on a large scale. Like, were you scared initially to go into Shakespeare, or was this something that was just worked into you in your youth, and so it wasn't quite that scared? And then when you come out of those and go back to work on television or film, do you see an actual benefit that you can talk about from dipping into that work?
I think Shakespeare excites me more than it intimidates me. And I owe that entirely to the English teachers I had when I was younger. They made Shakespeare fun. I had an English teacher who likes to improvise iambic pentameter, which is the meter that a lot of his text is written in. And that was like an aspirational thing to me rather than this like kooky old world thing that doesn't have any sort of relevance to my life now. There's a real poetry in the language that he writes in. So I'm really grateful to my English teachers from a young age for making that world accessible to me, because I know that if your first interaction with it isn't, it can put you off for life and it can be this real big block.
Yep.
So I'm really blessed to have had people who were passionate about it and encouraged that passion in me, which meant when I went to the RSC, I mean, I think the second play I'd ever seen in my life was at the RSC, and I've been taken by school. So I'd always seen it as this sort of like a destination, this benchmark of quality, you know. So to be working there was an honor and a joy for me. It was something that I wanted to do in my career. So to have had the opportunity to do it twice is it's more than a dream come true. But I also knew that if I'm performing at that level, like my boyhood enjoyment of Shakespeare wasn't going to be enough. And there's a lot more work that needs to go into that. To speak to the second part of your question, I think that Shakespeare is dense and difficult text, man. And you really have to pull it apart. You have to know exactly what your character is saying at all times, what he's hearing, the detail and the unpacking that one needs to do with Shakespearean text. If you apply even half of that to text written in modern day contemporary speech, then you're doing the work that you need to do. And I think I find coming out of Shakespeare roles, because I've had to so unknot the text for myself, for the rest of the cast and for the audience that we're sharing it with, I can't help but bring that practice into contemporary work as well, be that contemporary theater or screen work.
Do you then have this what's the right word? Another actor might be not hesitant at all to demand text be changed if a scene isn't working. Would you be more like, no, we have to figure out what's here? Does that come out of that, like this reverence toward the text?
That's a very good point. I think I was raised with this rigidity, especially with Shakespeare, that this is the text. You know, it's been the text for 400 years. Why are you going to change it? You know.
Yeah.
But also, I do think that said, I think it's super important to make classical work important contemporarily.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just performing time machine art, you know?
Yeah.
So when we set Shakespeare in a different setting, or we cut it and say like, okay, that's not relevant to now. This anti-Semitism is definitely not relevant to now. Get rid of that. Or we reframe that and say like, what we're using this piece of work to discuss today. That's when it becomes a lot more exciting and a lot more prescient, a lot more engaging. That said, before it's like, this is the text. You can't change it because it's been this way forever. So what are you going to do in your performance to make it contemporary? How are you going to make this more accessible to your audience? I always felt there was a lot more responsibility on the actor and the company, the cast, and in rehearsals, like, what are we going to do to stretch this and make it more malleable, rather than it just being this like fusty dusty thing on a shelf. But it does also mean that when I get to modern writing or screen work, that I, rather than feeling trapped, which is one way of sort of experiencing it, I feel the challenge of like making it work. And if it doesn't work, then I know, okay, cool, there's something wrong here. There really is. I've tried my best. But I think it definitely gives you this attitude of like, no, let me try and unpack this. Let me try it a different way before we change it. Mm-hmm. Because writers are not often as much of a part of the process as they were, especially in screen. So I also know that some writers are very particular about the words they use, the meter of the speech. Like, I'm not writing this sentence because I want you to convey meaning. I'm writing this sentence because I chose this word for this character in this moment. So say it, you know? Yeah. I've heard of, I haven't worked with anybody like that, but I'm looking forward to the challenge of saying that word in that moment because the character, and it comes back to sort of, the writers created these skeletons of characters, and some of them flesh them out more than we give them credit for.
Have you developed a game plan or an approach to auditioning that has become like a tried and truth thing that you apply each time? And has that changed?
I think the biggest thing, the most important thing is to take the pressure off myself. I used to believe that every time I had an audition, if I didn't get it, it was my fault. Like, I didn't prepare enough, or I didn't say the line the right way, or I wasn't good enough. And that creates this really negative spiral that is very difficult to get out of after a while. I think it took me a really long time to learn that there are so many things at play when you're auditioning someone for a role. Are they going to be two tools stood next to the other character that you've already cast? Is literally the reason some people don't get roles, you know? Because, it is, and I mean, like, without it being a racial thing, does this person's skin tone work against this other thing, you know? And that's a bit more like contentious. But I've heard decisions been made on some really, really strange things. Or if you've got a company, like, this person can play 3 different roles, but that person is only good enough to play 1 role. So they're going to have to pay that role. So that means that person's going to get bumped down to a different role. Not because I didn't want them for that role, but because in terms of balancing this company, you know, that's a decision that gets made all the time. So I think the tried and tested sort of advice on the auditions is to go into that room and make yourself proud, you know, perform at the best level that you can. So you know that the reason that you didn't get the role wasn't because you wasn't good enough. It's because of all of the other factors that happen in this industry, you know? Rather than you looking back and be like, you know what, I didn't prepare well enough for that. I didn't do my best work. So actually, it probably might have been because I wasn't good enough, you know? But that preparation is super key. And then also the ability to be playful, to come, this is the decisions that I made about this character. You might have a completely different idea. We can talk about that, you know? And I'll tell you why I think I'm right, and you can tell me why you think you're right. And we will have an opportunity to work together in this room to see if we can work together on set or in rehearsals, you know? But yeah, it's unless it is your fault, it's rarely ever got anything to do with you.
And how do you know if it is your fault?
Although there is this one story I have, like I auditioned for Kenneth Branagh one time, and I was so prepared. I could have done the speeches that he asked me to do backwards. But when I got into the room, I realized I was in the room with Kenneth Branagh. And like, I just...
That killed you.
Yeah, my feet were taken from underneath me. Because it
should have been on him. He should have taken that off himself.
Yeah.
Blame him.
I hope he hears this and he feels bad about it and then reaches out to me one time. That'd be great. But yeah, sometimes it just doesn't go your way, you know, in the room.
What happened though? Like, did you lose all your preparation, or did you just have nervousness just flooded over you?
Yeah, it was the nerves, man. And the nerves took the lines clean out of my head. I'd run the scenes before I went into the room with a really good friend of mine, and I was feeling confident. I felt like a boxer who was ready to go into the ring. I was warm. And then he was just sat there like still and stoic. And
I knew it. I'm blaming him. That fucker he's an actor. He's not he should have known how to take that down.
Yeah.
Let's blame him.
I look at him as one of the self-styled foremost Shakespearean actors alive at the moment. He's the guy that's played all the roles. And
yeah.
So I was just like, hang on, I'm going to do Shakespeare in front of Shakespeare on Earth, you know? Yeah. And I sort of lost my confidence. I lost this sort of spark and guile that I was really proud to bring into that room. And yeah, it didn't go my way, unfortunately.
And he, of course, he's not going to listen to this, but he is going to, if he hasn't already, realize the opportunity he lost there.
Okay. I'm going to put it on him from now on. Thank you for reframing that for me.
Yes. Gangs of London is fucking crazy, man. I'm not a big fan of fight scenes. Like, they bore me. I fall asleep in action movies. Watching this was like an experience I've never had, which is that I kept shifting back and forth from how the fuck is this actor able to do this, and then like half a second later, I was squinching. I was like, so like I'm like behind the curtain and then totally in front of the curtain, reacting as as a person to this. I never react like that. I never squirm. So here, to have that experience was so interesting. Particularly in the first and second episodes, you have fight scenes that, the term symphony of violence, I think is not exaggeration. But there is choreography that has to be done here. I'm in awe of how you were able to do what you had to do technically and choreographically. Mm-hmm. And still do what you have to do as an actor. Can you talk about that a little bit? I know that they gave you, like, in your audition, they had basically had like a fight audition. They wanted to see if you were physically able to, if you didn't have two left feet, I guess, or whatever, two left fists. I don't know what the right term is for this, but so they want, because they knew what they were going to have to put you through. But how are you able to do your work in this?
One of the blessings and joys of working with Gareth is that it may never happen again. This level of fight choreography. I think he really is foremost in that field in cinema at the moment. But I think similar to what we were talking about earlier about preparation and also everything that has happened up until this moment, why are you fighting? Is a really big question I have. Like, what? Yeah, you may have a character that's predisposed to violence. Why? If you can answer that, that sort of helps you justify what's going on in this moment and the intensity with which they're fighting. There is a story and there's storytelling in those fight sequences, especially in Gareth's work. And I think whilst the fight itself is a really great set piece to watch, it's really just another step in the journey of this character story.
Yes, yes.
So there is story going into the fight. There is story of the fight. And I think one of the greatest examples of that is the fight scene that's at the end of episode 1, part B, where he goes into the Doss house. He's come here looking, he's followed the registration plate, he's come here looking for answers. He meets a guy who doesn't want to give him any answers. And then in that moment, it's about survival.
Yeah.
Elliot's not fighting to prove anything. He's not fighting to beat the answers out of this guy. This guy will kill him. That sequence, I think Gareth likens it to like a horror sequence, and it's about get out of that room, get out alive any way that you can. And that quality comes into the fight sequences. You can see it on his face. You can see it in the choices that he makes to pick up this mattress and protect himself.
Yes.
Not an aggressive move, It's entirely defensive. He just wants to survive. So I think there is a lot of performance that goes into the performing of the fight sequences as well in terms of the storytelling. And that helps you helps with the performance each side of it.
How are you able though, this had to be done so piecemeal, so particular. I mean, it seemed like it took 3 days probably to film these scenes.
3.5, maybe 4.
Oh my God. So, I mean, you need to do this kind of work in this tiny section over and over, you know what I mean? Did you have a process to getting into that? Did you need something to be done on the set? Did you need a certain environment to help you?
I don't know, especially with the sequences I was talking about just now. The environment that we were shooting in was a character in itself, It gave you all of the horror vibes that you needed.
Yeah.
And that wasn't on a soundstage either. That was in a building that looked like that the whole way through. So even if you stepped off the scene in which we were fighting into the green room, it's still really derelict. You're still in that mind space,
That had to help, I guess.
You go into a room, there's like broken glass on the floor. You're just like, I don't want to get tetanus or anything, so I'm not gonna. I've got to survive this haunted building rather than just this room. But no. Also, like the atmosphere on set, whilst it is brutal and violent and horrible in places, we formed like a really great close-knit group. So it was like a pleasure to be there, actually. And in terms of switching something on when the camera starts rolling, I had Lee Charles, who's like this 6'3" mountain of a man with a meat cleaver and not very much else on in front of me. Like, I don't think there was much acting required for that sequence, especially.
And do you think that this is true, that I'm getting this impression from actors that even in a scene like this, or even in a scene, let's just say, where you're sitting next to your character is sitting next to the bed of your dying son, and that you're shooting for 3 days. Both of those things, enjoyable and pleasant set is actually helpful. I mean, whereas some people might think we need to have direness on here because we're acting dire. Or William Friedkin shooting a gun in the air during The Exorcist, wanting tension, off camera because he thinks that helps. And is it true that actually is not true? Like having pleasantness, having enjoyable, liking the people, not having this thing where the actor that you are playing that you're supposed to hate actually is ignoring you in real life because that's helping for some reason him do that, that's kind of stuff doesn't really work.
I don't know. I'm super keen to work with directors who will fire firearms on set because they think it's creating something. Because like this, that's the joy of collaborative art. Everyone's got their own processes, and you can either learn from them, might be able to say, oh, I'm going to take that for something I'm using in the future, or be like, that's not how I like to work and I never want to experience that again. But you won't know until you do, you know? I think everyone wants to work, regardless of their jobs, in environments in which they feel safe and supported to do their best work. But at the same time, Lee, all the way through rehearsals, he wasn't really friendly with me. He wasn't really pally and chummy. And then after we finished our fight scene, he turned out to be like the nicest guy. And I suppose I'll never know whether that helped or hindered my process. It just was what I was working with at the time. And it was useful because they were antagonists to each other. But it's in sort of, I believe that your process is something that will develop over time. I think even established actors are willing to learn new things. And I think that openness is what makes them wonderful actors and wonderful people to work with. I'm looking forward to finding out. It may come a time in the future where I am not really present and jovial with someone who I'm playing opposite with, because I need that and maybe they need that as well. It's interesting, like a lot of stuff you can talk about beforehand and be like, I think this is what I want to achieve. How do we want to go about that and collaborate? But that not being friends because the characters aren't friends is rarely ever a conversation that happens before. Because if you have that conversation, then you know it's pretense, you know it's like artificial. Whereas if you just commit to it and you're really dismissive of that person, then it might actually cause friction with you as people.
Right.
And you may never be able to like reconcile that afterwards, but hopefully the art is good if it's worth it.
Another genre that I find hard to love all the time is horror. And I think that's primarily because I get really tired with tropes and with, jump scares, and, it just gets tiring for me. But your new movie, His House, felt different to me, and it didn't hit those tired markers. And I think that might be because its horror is kind of seeped in with this political and social situation that these two characters find themselves in. And is that bit of depth and seriousness and timeliness that I really responded to. Was that something that you responded to in the script? And is that why you wanted to be a part of this?
Yeah, it was the thing that attracted me to the piece. Like you said, there's something really prescient and urgent about it. And I think the best kind of genre films are rooted in issues of today.
Yes.
And His House is most definitely that. Actively is that. It's actively discussing and challenging and tackling conversations around the migrant crisis. It was the character of Bol in His House is really interesting examination, interrogation, and analysis of masculinity and traditional masculinity and how it's really not helpful in a lot of situations. And this was one of them.
There are people that are going to see Gangs of London and His House in the same month here in the States.
Yeah.
They're not going to know that you're the same actor.
You reckon?
Is that going to be a compliment to you?
Most definitely. Recently, I had a full beard, shaved it down to a tash for a period film that I'm doing. And then they said they didn't like the tash, so I shaved that off. And then it was 2 weeks between me shaving and then the first day of shooting. So I'd grown this like beard back and then shaved it. And like every time I see someone different in my life, they're like, hang on, you look different. I didn't know that was you, So even if like just my facial hair changing is causing that sort of confusion, that's great. Because for me, I really appreciate and celebrate transformation in performance. I've learned it's not necessary all the time. because it might not be conducive to the story that you're telling. And actually, transformation shouldn't be an obstacle to truth. But if I can transform, like what Charlize Theron did in Monster, you know, you look at that film, you can't tell that that's her. What Joaquin Phoenix does in a lot of his films, what Heath Ledger did for the Joker, it wasn't necessarily just the face paint. It was everything underneath the face paint, you know? Those are performances that I look up to and just like, I would love to be able to do that. So for people to watch His House and they're like, hang on, what? That's the same actor from Gangs of London? So it's a wonderful compliment for me. It's not something I necessarily try to achieve in those roles, but if it's happening without me aiming for that, then when I do want to achieve it, hopefully it will be remarkable.
And does the idea of having to do an accent play into that? Like, do you enjoy when something requires that? And is that something that you put a lot of effort in, focus on, and then that is actually helpful rather than a burden?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, it's definitely challenging. And if I'm going to do an accent, in fact, in His House, we had a lot of conversations back and forth because a true stinker South Sudanese accent is a lot stronger than what we were playing in the film. Mm. And I wanted to go all the way there. I wanted to be truthful to these people that I was representing. Mm. But then there was issues about understandability, and you don't want to have to subtitle your film, and we have to make sure that we're making art that is able to be consumed by more people and the markets that we were playing to. So I wanted to do more, you know?
Yeah.
I wanted to be as honest and as real as possible. And I suppose that, yeah, accent is part of the transformation. It's interesting when I watch some of my closest friends who are actors do accents, and I'm just like, I can now see you as an entirely different person.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that happens when people code switch as well. You know, in certain environments, people speak a different way, and it makes you see them different every time. So, yeah, I think voice is definitely, you asked me about movement at the beginning of this, but I think voice is a very big part of character building because it indicates class, indicates maybe your heritage, can indicate dissonance. Like, it's not a nice thing to hear or say, really, but a lot of people said that when I was growing up, that my voice didn't really match my skin color. I was like, okay, well, I don't know what you want me to do with that. But that gives you so much information about the person because maybe they didn't grow up in a certain area or they defy certain stereotypes, which is a great thing. But yeah, I think the way you move before you open your mouth can say a lot about your character. And then the way your character speaks, not even what they're saying yet, can tell you a lot about the character. And then what they say about themselves and other people and situations is another piece of information.
When I was on Zoom just before, I realized that waiting for you, I realized that the thing was recording, and so someone's gonna, I don't use the video, but someone someday is going to just find this beginning of this video of me just here like this for about 5 minutes. But then I thought, I want to watch that because I usually am always performing when there's a camera. At least a little bit, or I'm conscious, or I'm trying to make sure and I want to just see a video of me where I've forgotten the camera's on. Like how often do you get to do that? And I thought, well, I'll be able to find out some things. Do you ever think about stuff like this? Like, do you watch yourself obsessively and try to see what your face is doing and become obsessed with that? A lot of actors I've talked to do not even watch at all anymore. Jesse Eisenberg doesn't see 1 second of anything he's in. There's other people like that, not to that insane thing, but some people will not. I mean, there's actors in other interviews that walked away when they were being forced to watch something. They're that protective of it. I mean, how do you feel about that kind of thing?
Yeah, I've had a really tumultuous relationship with that over the course of my career so far. And I haven't decided, and it might change. I don't know. It change from project to project, I suppose. But if I was forced to pick one way or the other from now on, it would definitely be to not watch it. I think that it's very easy to become vain, and being vain is difficult to avoid. Because especially with cinema, like that image of your face is going to be massive on those cinema screens, you know, and there's nowhere to hide, but it's not you, it's the character. At the beginning of my career, it'd be very easy to be like, oh no, I look kind of ugly in that shot. I need to do something else. I need to look more heroic. Whereas that's not what's needed in this scene. Like, that's probably the most truthful performance I gave before I started like watching myself and editing myself. Like, we don't do that in real life. If you're having a conversation with someone face to face, you don't be like, unless you do, you know, unless that's what the character is like inner vanity is, like, oh, I need to hold my posture in a certain way to make sure that they think this of me. But then that's about the relationship you have with that person, as opposed to the relationship you're having with someone else who's observing it. And I think a lot of screen acting is about being present and allowing the camera to capture performances rather than performing for the camera. But it's interesting what you were saying earlier about like, every time you know that the camera's on, there's naturally a bit of performance, whether that's because you know you have an audience or it's probably just that. But I had to do an audition for Mike Lee recently, who I'd love to work with at some point in the future. Yeah. And he gave me no text. He asked me to think about one of my friends, and we discussed one of my friends. And he's like, okay, I want you to be your friend with no stimulus. Just be him in space. Go.
Yeah.
And it was so fascinating. It's like I learned so much from that audition, because that's what performance should be. It should just be being, you know? And what would your character do when they're doing nothing, you know? And I found myself so uncomfortable for a while because I wasn't performing. I wasn't responding. I wasn't doing anything. And actually that inner life, that being, is something that we should all have in all of the characters that we make. And I think that comes back to what I said about being and then allowing the camera to capture that, or being on stage and allowing just it to be viewed voyeuristically by all the people in the room that don't exist, because your focus as an actor and as a character is on your given circumstance or your task or your other actor.
You've mentioned that one of the best pieces of advice you've ever been given is be nice and do good work. Mm-hmm. And before I say what I want to say, I want everyone to just listen to those words. It's very simple, but it's very, very powerful, I think. Be nice and do good work for actors. Just think about that for a second. But how do you stay nice in this business? There's so much fakery that you're just inundated with.
I think one of the best ways of doing it is setting boundaries and being like, this is as close to the center of my person as I'm allowing you. And I know that I have really good friends and really great family that I can rely on for important things, but I need to maintain a distance from you that I can continue to be nice, you know? And when you can identify that someone is fake or someone is a liar or someone is manipulative, then you just maintain that distance and then cut them off. You know, I think that goes for life in general, not necessarily just our industry. So far, I've been blessed in that I've not encountered too many of those people. Otherwise, my answer may have been slightly different. But that's what I have for now, I think.
Ṣọpẹ Dìrísù, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.